The October wind cut across the high desert plateau like a blade, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Samuel Thompson pulled his worn coat tighter as he guided his horse along the fence line of his ranch, checking for breaks in the wire that separated his grazing land from the vast wilderness beyond. At 42, Sam had spent nearly half his life in this harsh but beautiful country, carving out a living from land that demanded respect and gave back only what a man earned through sweat and determination. His ranch, the Double T, sprawled across 3,000 acres of some of the most challenging terrain in the Arizona Territory. The red rock mesas rose like ancient sentinels in the distance, and the scattered stands of juniper and oak dotted the rolling grassland where his cattle grazed. It was 1887, and the territory was still rough country, where a man's word was his bond, and his rifle was often his closest companion. Sam had built the ranch from nothing, starting with a small homestead claim and gradually purchasing adjoining land from neighbors who had given up fighting the harsh conditions. His nearest neighbor lived 12 miles to the east, and the small settlement of Copper Creek was a hard day's ride to the south. The isolation suited Sam fine. He had come west to escape the crowded cities and the memories of a war that had taken too much from too many good men. The ranch house itself was a solid structure built from local stone and timber, with a wide porch that faced the morning sun and thick walls that kept out both the summer heat and winter cold. Sam had built it with his own hands, planning each room with the hope that someday it might shelter a family. That dream had grown dimmer with each passing year, but he maintained the house as if that family might arrive tomorrow. Behind the main house stood a sturdy barn, a chicken coop, and a small bunkhouse that housed his 2 ranch hands during the busy seasons. Miguel Santos, a steady man in his 50s, had worked for Sam for nearly 8 years. The other hand, Jake Morrison, was younger and newer, but he had proven himself reliable and hard-working. Both men had ridden out that morning to check on the cattle in the north pasture, leaving Sam to handle the fence inspection alone. As he rode the fence line, Sam's experienced eye caught every detail of his land. The grass was still decent despite the dry spell, though he would need to move the cattle to fresh pasture soon. Several fence posts needed tightening, and he made mental notes of repairs that would need attention before the weather turned. The work was never-ending, but Sam found satisfaction in the steady rhythm of ranch life and the independence it provided. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when Sam first noticed the figure in the distance. At first, he thought it might be a coyote or perhaps one of his cattle that had wandered away from the herd. But as he adjusted his position to get a better view, he realized it was a person walking across the open ground near the base of Red Mesa, still perhaps a mile from his position. Sam dismounted and pulled his field glasses from his saddlebag, focusing on the distant figure. Through the lenses, he could see it was a young woman moving slowly and deliberately across the rough terrain. Even from this distance, he could tell she was in distress. Her movements were unsteady, and she frequently stopped to rest. She appeared to be carrying a small bundle, and her clothing suggested she might be Apache. The sight gave Sam pause. Relations between the white settlers and the Apache had been tense for years, though there had been fewer incidents lately. The Apache reservation was about 30 miles to the north, but it was not uncommon for individuals or small groups to travel through the area. Most encounters were peaceful, particularly when it involved women or children, but Sam knew that a lone Apache woman in this territory was likely in serious trouble. Sam lowered the glasses and considered his options. He could continue his fence work and pretend he had not seen her. It would be the safe choice, the one that most of his neighbors would probably make. The woman was clearly heading in the general direction of his ranch, but she might veer off and continue toward the settlement, or she might seek shelter elsewhere. Getting involved with Apache affairs could bring complications that a man living alone could ill afford. But as Sam watched the figure stumble and fall, then struggle to rise again, he knew he could not simply ride away. His father had raised him to believe that turning away from someone in need was the worst kind of cowardice. The war had shown him enough suffering to last several lifetimes, and he had sworn to himself that he would never again stand by while someone suffered if he had the power to help. Sam mounted his horse and turned toward the distant figure. The ride took him nearly 20 minutes across the uneven ground, and as he drew closer, his assessment of the situation became more accurate. The young woman was indeed Apache, probably in her late teens or early 20s. Her traditional dress was torn and dusty, and her moccasins were worn nearly through. She carried a small woven bundle that appeared to contain her few possessions. When she noticed his approach, the woman stopped walking and stood perfectly still, watching him with dark eyes that showed both wariness and exhaustion. Sam slowed his horse and approached carefully, keeping his hands visible and away from his weapons. He had learned enough Apache customs during his years in the territory to know that sudden movements or threatening gestures could turn a peaceful encounter into a dangerous one. Sam stopped his horse about 20 feet from the woman and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. He could see now that she was quite young, probably no more than 20, with the high cheekbones and strong features characteristic of her people. Her black hair was braided with small ornaments that caught the afternoon light. Despite her obvious exhaustion, she held herself with a dignity that impressed him. "Ma'am," Sam said quietly, using the tone he might use with a frightened horse. "I'm Sam Thompson. I have a ranch not far from here. You look like you could use some help." The young woman studied him for a long moment before responding. When she spoke, her English was clear and precise, though accented with the rhythms of her native language. "I am called Ayana," she said. "I seek shelter and food. I have traveled far." Sam could see the truth of her words in every line of her exhausted posture. Whatever had brought her to this point, she had endured a significant hardship. Her clothes bore the stains of travel, and her face showed the drawn look of someone who had not eaten adequately in several days. "My ranch is about 3 miles south," Sam told her. "You're welcome to shelter there for the night. I can offer you food and a safe place to rest." Ayana considered his offer carefully. Sam could see her weighing the risks of trusting a white stranger against the obvious need for food and shelter. The approaching darkness and the cold wind that was picking up as the sun dropped lower made the decision urgent. "You ask nothing in return?" she asked, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. "Nothing beyond common decency," Sam replied. "A person in need deserves help, regardless of who they are or where they come from. My mother taught me that, and I believe it to be true." Something in his straightforward manner seemed to reassure Ayana. She nodded slowly. "I will accept your offer, Samuel Thompson, but I will work for any food or shelter you provide. I do not accept charity." Sam smiled slightly, recognizing the pride that motivated her words. "I can always use help around the ranch. We can work something out that's fair to both of us." Sam dismounted and offered to let Ayana ride his horse while he walked alongside. She accepted gratefully, and Sam could see that the simple act of getting off her feet provided immediate relief. As they began the journey to the ranch, Sam found himself curious about what circumstances had brought this young Apache woman to his remote corner of the territory. "If you don't mind my asking," he said as they walked, "where were you headed when you came through this area?" Ayana was quiet for several steps before answering. "I was traveling to the settlement at Copper Creek. I had heard there might be work there for someone who can sew and cook." Sam nodded, understanding immediately why that journey had become desperate. Copper Creek was still more than a day's travel from where he had found her, and the route crossed some of the most barren country in the territory. For someone on foot with limited supplies, it was a dangerous undertaking. "Have you been traveling long?" he asked. 4 days. Ayanna replied. I had more food when I started, but I shared it with some children I met along the way. They were hungrier than I was. This simple statement told Sam volumes about the character of the young woman riding his horse. Despite her own need, she had prioritized the welfare of children she encountered. It was exactly the kind of selfless act that Sam most admired, and it reinforced his conviction that offering her shelter was the right decision. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch house. The golden light of evening painted the stone walls with warm color, and smoke rose from the chimney where Miguel had built up the fire before heading to the bunkhouse. Sam helped Ayanna down from the horse and led the way to the front porch. The house has several rooms, Sam explained as they approached the door. There's a spare bedroom that you can use for as long as you need it. The kitchen is well stocked and there's water for washing. Ayanna paused at the threshold, looking up at the solid construction of the house and the careful attention to detail that was evident in its construction. You built this yourself, she observed. Yes, ma'am. Took me the better part of 3 years, working mostly in the winter months when ranch work was lighter. It is good work, Ayanna said, running her hand along the smooth wood of the doorframe. My grandfather was a builder. He taught me to recognize quality craftsmanship. Sam opened the door and lit the oil lamps that provided evening light for the main room. The interior of the house was clean and well organized, with handmade furniture and simple decorations that reflected both comfort and practicality. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the kitchen area was separated from the main living space by a wooden counter that Sam had built himself. The spare room is through that door, Sam said, indicating a hallway that led to the back of the house. There are clean blankets and bedding. The kitchen is yours to use whenever you need it. Ayanna set down her small bundle and looked around the room with obvious appreciation. After days of sleeping on the ground and eating whatever sparse food she could find or catch, the simple comfort of a clean, warm house was almost overwhelming. I will prepare food, she said, moving toward the kitchen area. It is the least I can do to repay your kindness. Sam started to protest that it was not necessary, but something in Ayanna's manner told him that accepting her offer was important to her sense of dignity. I would appreciate that, he said instead. There's fresh beef in the cold storage and vegetables from the garden. As Ayanna began to explore the kitchen and assess the available ingredients, Sam excused himself to tend to his horse and complete the evening chores. When he returned to the house nearly an hour later, he was greeted by aromas that made his mouth water. Ayanna had found the beef and vegetables and created a stew that filled the kitchen with rich, savory scents. I added some herbs I found in your garden, she explained, as Sam washed his hands at the kitchen pump. They are plants my people use for cooking. I hope you do not mind. I don't mind at all, Sam assured her. I planted that garden hoping to attract someone who knew more about cooking than I do. They ate together at the kitchen table as darkness settled over the ranch. The stew was excellent, seasoned with unfamiliar herbs that enhanced the flavor of the beef and vegetables in ways Sam had never experienced. Ayanna ate with obvious hunger but maintained the careful manners of someone who had been well raised. This is delicious, Sam told her. Where did you learn to cook like this? My mother and grandmother taught me, Ayanna replied. In my family, the women are responsible for feeding the family, and it is considered a mark of honor to prepare food that nourishes both the body and the spirit. As they ate, Sam found himself increasingly curious about Ayanna's story. She spoke English fluently and demonstrated familiarity with white customs, suggesting that she had experience in both worlds. Her manner was confident and dignified, not what he would have expected from someone who had been reduced to begging for shelter. If you don't mind my asking, Sam said carefully, what brought you to be traveling alone toward Copper Creek? Ayanna was quiet for several moments, and Sam thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, Her voice carried a note of pain that she tried to keep controlled. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said. "He was a good man who worked as a translator for the Indian agency. After his death, his family blamed me for bringing bad luck. They said I should return to my own family, but my parents died when I was very young. I was raised by my grandmother, and she passed away 2 years ago." Sam felt a stab of sympathy for the young woman. To lose so many people in such a short time would be devastating for anyone, but for a young Apache woman, it would mean losing not just emotional support but also economic security and social standing. "I tried to make a living on the reservation," Ayanna continued, "but work is scarce, and there are too many people competing for too few opportunities. I heard that there might be work in the white settlements for someone who could cook and sew. I decided to try to make a new life for myself." "That took considerable courage," Sam observed, "leaving everything familiar to travel alone into uncertain territory." Ayanna shrugged. "Sometimes courage is not a choice. Sometimes it is simply the only alternative to giving up entirely." After dinner, Sam showed Ayanna to the spare bedroom and provided her with everything she needed for the night. The room was small but comfortable, with a good bed and a washstand. Sam had built the room with the hope that it might someday house children, but it served equally well as guest quarters. "Tomorrow, if you're willing, I could use help with some projects around the ranch," Sam told her as he prepared to leave her to rest. "Nothing too strenuous, but tasks that could use someone with skilled hands." "I would be grateful for the work," Ayanna replied. "I meant what I said about not accepting charity. If I am to stay here even briefly, I must contribute something of value." Sam nodded understanding. "We'll find plenty for you to do. This ranch can always use more skilled hands." As Sam settled in his own room for the night, he reflected on the unexpected turn his day had taken. That morning, his biggest concern had been fence repairs and cattle rotation. Now he was housing a young Apache woman whose presence would undoubtedly complicate his quiet existence. But as he thought about Ayanna's dignity, her obvious skills, and her determination to maintain her self-respect, even in desperate circumstances, Sam found that he was looking forward to learning more about his unexpected guest. Dawn came early to the Double T Ranch, painting the eastern mountains with shades of rose and gold. Sam had always been an early riser, but as he stepped onto his front porch with his first cup of coffee, he was surprised to see smoke already rising from the kitchen chimney. Through the window, he could see Ayanna moving efficiently around the kitchen, and the aroma of fresh bread drifted out to greet the morning air. When Sam entered the kitchen, he found Ayanna putting the finishing touches on what appeared to be a complete breakfast. Fresh bread sat cooling on the counter. Eggs were cooking in a cast-iron skillet, and she had somehow managed to prepare what looked like fried potatoes seasoned with herbs he did not recognize. "Good morning," Sam said, genuinely impressed by what she had accomplished in the short time since sunrise. "You didn't need to go to all this trouble." Ayanna looked up from the stove, her dark hair neatly braided and her clothes freshened from the previous day's travel dust. "I told you I would work for my shelter. This is how I begin to repay your kindness." "Well, if this is how you repay kindness, I'm going to have to start being kinder to more people," Sam said with a smile. "This smells better than anything that's come out of this kitchen since I built it." They ate together as the morning light grew stronger, and Sam found himself appreciating not just the excellent food, but also the companionship. Living alone had its advantages, but sharing breakfast with someone who appreciated both good food and intelligent conversation reminded him of pleasures he had almost forgotten. "What would you like me to work on today?" Ayanna asked as they finished eating. Sam had given this question considerable thought during his morning coffee. He had plenty of work that needed doing, but he wanted to choose tasks that would showcase Ayanna's skills while also being genuinely useful to the ranch operation. "I've got a pile of torn clothing and damaged equipment that needs mending," he said. "Some of it just needs simple repairs, but other pieces need more skilled work. If you're as good with a needle as you are with cooking, that would solve a problem I've been putting off for months." "I would like to see what needs to be done," Ayanna replied. "My grandmother taught me to work with both fabric and leather. She said that a woman who could not repair what was broken would always be dependent on others." Sam led her to a storage room where he had accumulated a collection of damaged items. There were torn shirts, pants with blown-out knees, leather chaps that needed new stitching, and even some horse tack that required expert repair work. Sam had been meaning to take the items to the settlement, but the trip would cost him a full day, and the quality of work available there was often questionable. Ayanna examined each item carefully, running the fabric through her fingers and testing the strength of existing seams. "Most of these can be repaired," she said after completing her assessment. "Some will be stronger than they were when new." "Do you have needles and thread?" "Some," Sam replied, "but probably not the quality you need for the best work." "Then we should make a trip to town for proper supplies," Ayanna suggested. "Good tools make good work possible." Sam considered this suggestion. Taking Ayanna to Copper Creek would inevitably attract attention and probably questions. The settlement was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's business, and the arrival of an Apache woman with the local rancher would certainly become a topic of conversation. But Ayanna was right that proper supplies were essential for quality work. "We could ride to the settlement tomorrow," Sam said. "It's about a day's journey, so we'd need to stay overnight and come back the following day." "I understand this may cause difficulties for you," Ayanna said, her voice carefully neutral. "If my presence would create problems, I can make the trip alone." Sam shook his head. "You're a guest on my ranch, and I don't send guests off on dangerous trips by themselves. We'll go together, and if anyone has a problem with that, they can discuss it with me directly." The determination in Sam's voice seemed to reassure Ayanna. She nodded and returned her attention to the damaged items. "Then I will begin with what can be done using the supplies you have. By the time we return from town, I will be ready to complete the more complex repairs." Sam left Ayanna to her work and went about his regular ranch duties. When he checked on her around midday, he was amazed by what she had accomplished. Several shirts that had been unusable were now neatly mended, and she was working on a pair of leather chaps that had suffered extensive damage. Her stitching was not only functional, but decorative, incorporating small patterns that enhanced the appearance of the repaired items. "This is remarkable work," Sam told her, examining a shirt that now looked better than it had when new. "Where did you learn to do decorative stitching like this?" "My grandmother was known throughout our band for her needlework," Ayanna explained, not looking up from her current project. "She said that if a thing was worth doing, it was worth making beautiful. She taught me that every stitch should be placed with intention and care." "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. She lived through many changes and adapted to all of them without losing her connection to our traditions. "She taught me that survival sometimes requires learning new ways, but it never requires abandoning who you are." Sam found this philosophy intriguing. It suggested a flexibility and strength of character that explained how Ayanna had been able to maintain her dignity even in desperate circumstances. That afternoon, Miguel and Jake returned from the north pasture with news that several cattle had wandered through a gap in the fence and were grazing on land that belonged to a neighboring ranch. It was the kind of problem that required immediate attention, both to recover the cattle and to repair the fence before more animals strayed. "I'll need to ride out and deal with this," Sam told Ayanna. "It might take until after dark to get everything sorted out." "I will prepare food that will keep warm until you return," Ayanna replied. "And I will continue working on the repairs." Sam saddled up with Miguel and Jake, and they spent the rest of the day tracking down the wayward cattle and fixing the fence. The work was hot, dusty, and tedious, requiring them to drive the cattle back across rough terrain and then rebuild an entire section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree. By the time they returned to the ranch house, Sam was exhausted and looking forward to nothing more than a simple meal and an early bedtime. But when he walked into the kitchen, he found that Ayanna had prepared a feast that rivaled the previous night's dinner. A roasted chicken sat on the counter, surrounded by vegetables that had been cooked with herbs that filled the room with an incredible aroma. "You didn't need to go to all this trouble," Sam protested, but he was clearly pleased by the effort. "You worked hard to provide for this ranch," Ayanna replied. "It is proper that you should be fed well when you return home." As they ate, Sam found himself telling Ayanna about the day's work and the challenges of managing cattle on such a large spread. She listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about ranch operations and offering observations about animal behavior based on her own experience with horses and livestock. "My husband worked with horses," she explained. "He taught me to watch their behavior and understand what they were trying to communicate. Cattle are different, but many of the same principles apply." "Would you like to see the horses tomorrow before we leave for town?" Sam asked. "I've got a small herd of saddle horses that I'm quite proud of." "I would enjoy that very much," Ayanna replied. "Good horses are one of life's great pleasures." The next morning, Sam led Ayanna to the pasture where he kept his riding stock. The horses were a mix of breeds, carefully selected for stamina, intelligence, and good temperament. Sam took pride in his horses and had spent years developing a reputation for raising reliable mounts. Ayanna's response to the horses was immediate and enthusiastic. She moved among them with the confidence of someone who understood and loved the animals. Several horses that were usually wary of strangers approached her without hesitation, and Sam could see that she had an instinctive understanding of horse behavior. "This mare is pregnant," Ayanna observed, running her hands along the side of a sorrel horse. "She will foal within the month, I think." Sam looked more closely at the mare, realizing that Ayanna was right. He had suspected the pregnancy, but had not been certain. "You have a good eye for horses." "My people have always worked closely with horses," Ayanna replied. "We learn to read their condition and mood as easily as we read the weather." As they prepared for the trip to Copper Creek, Sam found himself looking forward to the journey with more anticipation than he had expected. Ayanna's company had already proven to be both pleasant and intellectually stimulating. She was clearly educated and experienced, but she also possessed practical skills that were genuinely valuable to ranch operations. The ride to Copper Creek took them through some of the most beautiful country in the territory. They followed a trail that wound through stands of oak and juniper, crossed several clear-running streams, and offered spectacular views of the surrounding mountains. Ayanna proved to be an excellent traveling companion, comfortable in the saddle and obviously enjoying the journey. "This is beautiful country," she said, as they paused to rest the horses at a scenic overlook. "I can understand why you chose to build your ranch here." "It chose me as much as I chose it," Sam replied. "I was looking for land that was far enough from civilization to provide peace and quiet, but still accessible enough to make a living. This seemed to offer the right balance. Do you ever miss the company of other people?" Sam considered the question carefully. "Sometimes, but I've found that solitude suits me better than crowds. I prefer the company of a few good friends to the noise and complication of town life." "That is wise," Ayanna said. "My grandmother used to say that it is better to know 5 people well than to know 50 people slightly." They reached Copper Creek in the late afternoon as the settlement was winding down from the day's business. Copper Creek was not much more than a wide spot in the road, with a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, and a handful of houses scattered along the main street. but it served the surrounding ranches and provided essential supplies for people living in the remote country. As Sam had expected, their arrival attracted considerable attention. Several people stopped to stare as they rode down the main street, and Sam could see conversations beginning as soon as they passed. He had anticipated this reaction and was prepared to deal with it, but he could see that Ayanna was aware of the scrutiny and was maintaining her composure despite what must have been an uncomfortable experience. They stopped at the general store, where Sam introduced Ayanna to the proprietor, Henry Walsh, as a guest who was staying at his ranch. Walsh was polite, but clearly curious about the arrangement. Sam made it clear through his manner that he expected Ayanna to be treated with the same courtesy that would be extended to any other customer. Ayanna selected her supplies with the care of someone who understood the value of quality tools. She chose needles, thread, leather-working implements, and several types of fabric with the knowledge of an expert. Sam was impressed by her ability to assess the quality of materials and select exactly what she needed without wasting time or money. "Your friend knows her business," Walsh commented to Sam as Ayanna examined a selection of leather. "She's one of the best seamstresses I've ever encountered," Sam replied. "I'm fortunate to have her help with some projects that have been waiting for someone with the right skills." As they completed their purchases, Sam noticed that word of their presence had spread through the settlement. Several people had found reasons to visit the general store, and he could feel the weight of curious stares. Most of the attention seemed to be simple curiosity, but Sam detected a few expressions that suggested less friendly interest. They took rooms at the small hotel for the night, and Sam made sure that Ayanna was treated with appropriate respect by the hotel staff. At dinner, they ate in the hotel dining room, where their presence continued to attract attention from other guests and staff. "Are you uncomfortable with all this attention?" Sam asked quietly as they finished their meal. "I am accustomed to being stared at when I'm in white settlements," Ayanna replied. "Most people mean no harm. They are simply curious about someone who is different from themselves. And the ones who do mean harm? Those I watch carefully, but I do not let them determine my actions. My grandmother taught me that living in fear is not really living at all." That evening, as they sat on the hotel porch watching the sunset, Sam reflected on how much his life had changed in just a few days. The presence of Ayanna at his ranch had already improved his daily existence in ways both practical and personal. Her skills as a cook and seamstress were valuable, but her intelligence and character were even more important. "Sam," Ayanna said quietly, "I want you to know that I am grateful for your kindness, but I do not want to bring trouble to your ranch. If my presence here creates problems for you, I will understand if you think it best that I move on." Sam looked at her, surprised by the suggestion. "Has someone said something to make you think you're causing problems?" "No one has said anything directly. But I can see the way people look at us. I know that some whites do not approve of close association between our peoples." "Some people disapprove of a lot of things," Sam said firmly. "That doesn't mean they're right, and it doesn't mean I'm obligated to live my life according to their prejudices. You're a skilled worker, a decent person, and good company. As far as I'm concerned, anyone who has a problem with that can keep their opinions to themselves." Ayanna smiled, the first completely relaxed smile Sam had seen from her. "Your mother raised a good son, Samuel Thompson." "She tried her best," Sam replied, "though I think she'd be pleased to know that her lessons are finally paying off." The next morning, they began the journey back to the ranch, their saddlebags filled with the supplies Ayanna needed to complete her repair work. The trip home was pleasant and uneventful, and Sam found himself hoping that their return to the ranch would mark the beginning of a longer-term arrangement. But as they approached the Double T, Sam noticed something that made him rein in his horse and study the area around his house more carefully. There were tracks in the dirt of the yard, more tracks than could be accounted for by his own people. Someone had visited the ranch while they were away, and from the look of the tracks, it had been more than one person. "What is it?" Ayanna asked, noticing his sudden alertness. "We had visitors while we were gone," Sam said, his voice grim. "And I don't think they were here for a social call." Sam dismounted and walked carefully around the ranch yard, studying the tracks that marked the hard-packed earth. Years of living in frontier country had taught him to read sign like a book, and what he saw in the dust told a story that made him increasingly concerned. At least 4 horses had been in his yard, and the depth of the tracks suggested that the riders had spent considerable time there, not just passing through. Ayanna remained mounted, watching Sam's examination with growing tension. She had learned to read danger signs as carefully as any frontier dweller, and the grim expression on Sam's face told her that the situation was serious. "Miguel!" Sam called toward the bunkhouse. "Jake!" The 2 ranch hands emerged from the small building, and Sam could immediately see from their faces that something was wrong. Miguel approached with the careful walk of a man who had news to deliver, but was not sure how it would be received. "Boss," Miguel said, "we had some visitors yesterday afternoon not long after you left for town. 4 men from the settlement. They were asking questions about your Apache guest." Sam felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "What kind of questions?" "They wanted to know how long she'd been here, where she came from, whether she was planning to stay," Jake replied. "They didn't seem too happy when we told them it wasn't any of their business." "Who were they?" Sam asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Tom Brennan was leading them," Miguel said. "Had his brother Dan with him, plus 2 other men I didn't recognize. They said they were representing the interests of the community." Sam cursed quietly under his breath. Tom Brennan owned a small ranch about 15 miles to the east, and had always been vocal in his dislike of the Apache. He had lost cattle to raiding parties several years earlier, and blamed all Apache for his losses. If Brennan was stirring up trouble, it could mean serious problems for everyone involved. "Did they say what they wanted?" Sam asked. "They made it pretty clear they don't think you should be harboring an Apache woman," Jake replied. "Said it was dangerous and could bring trouble to the whole area. They wanted us to tell them when you'd be back so they could talk to you directly." "And what did you tell them?" "We told them you'd be back when you got back, and that if they wanted to talk to you, they could wait or come back another time," Miguel said with satisfaction. "We also made it clear that anyone causing trouble on the Double T would have to answer to all of us." Sam felt a surge of gratitude toward his loyal hands. Miguel and Jake were good men who understood that loyalty meant standing with your boss even when the situation became complicated. "They left any other messages?" Sam asked. "Brennan said to tell you that harboring hostile Indians was against the interests of all the white settlers in the territory," Jake replied. "He said the community wouldn't stand for it." Sam looked up at Ayanna, who had listened to this exchange in silence. Her face was carefully controlled, but he could see the tension in her posture and the way her hands gripped the reins of her horse. "I should leave," Ayanna said quietly. "I do not want to bring trouble to you or your men." "No," Sam said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. Brennan and his friends don't speak for the community, and they sure don't get to decide who I can and cannot welcome on my own ranch." Sam helped Ayanna down from her horse and carried their supplies into the house. As they unpacked the materials she had purchased for her sewing work, Sam could see that she was struggling with the situation. Her earlier confidence had been replaced by a quiet worry that reminded him how vulnerable her position really was. "Sam," she said as they arranged the supplies on the kitchen table, "perhaps these men are right. Perhaps my presence here does create dangers that you have not considered." "What dangers?" Sam asked. "The danger that you might repair my clothes too well? The danger that I might eat better than I have in years? The danger that I might actually enjoy having intelligent conversation at dinner?" Despite her worry, Ayanna smiled at his deliberate misunderstanding of her concern. You know what I mean. There are some white men who believe that any association between our peoples will lead to conflict. They may try to force you to send me away. Let them try, Sam replied. This is my ranch, and I'll decide who stays and who goes. Tom Brennan and his friends can disapprove all they want, but they can't make me change my mind about giving shelter to someone who needs it. Sam's determination seemed to reassure Ayanna, but he could see that she remained troubled by the situation. That evening, as she prepared dinner, she was quieter than usual, and Sam found himself thinking about the best way to handle the brewing conflict. The next morning brought an answer he had not expected. As Sam finished his breakfast and prepared to begin the day's work, he heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking out the kitchen window, he could see a group of riders making their way toward the ranch house. But instead of the troublemakers he had expected, he saw Dr. Marcus Webb, the physician who served the Copper Creek area, along with two other men Sam recognized as respectable members of the community. Sam stepped onto the porch to greet his visitors, with Ayanna remaining discreetly inside the house. Dr. Webb was a man in his 60s who had earned the respect of everyone in the territory through his skill and dedication. If he was involved in this situation, it suggested that the community's response to Ayanna's presence was more complex than Sam had initially realized. "Morning, Sam," Dr. Webb said as he dismounted. "Sorry to bother you so early, but we've got a situation that we think you and your guest might be able to help us with." Sam invited the men onto the porch and offered them coffee, curious about what had brought them to his ranch. Dr. Webb accepted the coffee gratefully and got directly to the point. "We had an outbreak of fever in town 3 days ago," he explained. "Started with the Morrison children, but it spread to about a dozen people, mostly children and elderly folks. I've been treating them with standard remedies, but I'm not making much progress. The symptoms are unlike anything I've seen before." Sam wondered what this had to do with Ayanna, but he listened carefully as Dr. Webb continued. "Yesterday, Tom Brennan was in town spreading stories about you harboring an Apache woman. Most folks just ignored him, but Mrs. Patterson, the school teacher, heard him talking and had an interesting reaction. She asked if the woman might be a medicine woman or someone with knowledge of traditional healing." Understanding began to dawn on Sam. "You think Ayanna might be able to help with the sickness?" "It's possible," Dr. Webb replied. "Apache medicine has had some remarkable successes with illnesses that stump conventional treatment. If your guest has any knowledge of traditional healing, she might be able to suggest something that could help these people." Sam called for Ayanna to join them on the porch. She approached the visitors with careful dignity, clearly uncertain about their intentions. Sam introduced her to Dr. Webb and explained the situation with the outbreak of fever in the settlement. "Dr. Webb is wondering if you might have any knowledge of traditional medicines that could help treat this illness," Sam explained. Ayanna listened carefully as Dr. Webb described the symptoms of the fever. Her expression grew increasingly thoughtful as he provided details about the progression of the illness and the treatments he had already tried. "These symptoms sound familiar," she said finally. "There is an illness that my people call the fire that burns from within. It appears most often in late summer and early fall, and it affects the young and the old most severely." "Do your people have treatments for this illness?" Dr. Webb asked with obvious interest. "My grandmother was skilled in the healing arts," Ayanna replied. "She taught me to prepare several medicines that are effective against this type of fever. But the plants I would need grow only in certain places, and I would need time to gather and prepare them properly." "What kind of plants?" Dr. Webb asked. Ayanna described several native plants that grew in the higher elevations of the surrounding mountains. Sam recognized some of them from his years of living in the territory, but he had never known they had medicinal properties. "I know where most of those plants can be found," Sam said. "If you think they might help, we could gather them today." The medicine requires careful preparation, Ayana warned. It is not simply a matter of boiling the plants in water. There are specific procedures that must be followed, or the medicine will be useless or even harmful. Dr. Webb nodded, understanding. I've seen enough frontier medicine to know that preparation is as important as ingredients. If you're willing to try, I'll support whatever treatment you recommend. Within an hour, Sam and Ayana were mounted and heading into the mountains to search for the plants she needed. Ayana proved to have an encyclopedic knowledge of local flora, locating plants that Sam had passed by hundreds of times without recognizing their value. As they gathered the materials, she explained the properties of each plant and how they would be combined to create an effective medicine. My grandmother spent 40 years learning the healing arts, Ayana explained as they worked. She taught me that healing is not just about knowing which plants to use, but understanding how they work together and how to prepare them so their power is not lost. How long will it take to prepare the medicine? Sam asked. If we gather enough materials today, I can have the first doses ready by tomorrow morning. But the medicine must be prepared in stages, and each stage requires careful timing. I will need to work through the night. They returned to the ranch in the late afternoon with saddlebags full of roots, leaves, and bark that Ayana had selected. She immediately began the process of preparing the medicine, using techniques that were clearly the result of generations of accumulated knowledge. Sam watched in fascination as she cleaned, sorted, and processed the various materials with the precision of a skilled craftsman. "Can I help with any of this?" Sam offered. "The initial preparation must be done by someone who knows the proper procedures," Ayana replied. "But later, when the materials need to be watched while they simmer, you could help by tending the fires and monitoring the timing." True to her word, Ayana worked through the night, carefully following procedures that had been passed down through generations of Apache healers. Sam helped where he could, keeping the fires at the right temperature and helping to measure timing for various stages of the preparation. By dawn, she had produced several bottles of liquid medicine that had a distinctive herbal aroma. Dr. Webb arrived at the ranch shortly after sunrise, clearly having spent a sleepless night worrying about his patients. Ayana explained the dosage and timing for the medicine, emphasizing that it needed to be administered exactly as directed for maximum effectiveness. "The children should receive half doses twice a day," she instructed. "Adults receive full doses. The medicine must be taken with water, and patients should rest as much as possible while the fever breaks." "How long before we see results?" Dr. Webb asked. "If the medicine is going to work, the fever should begin to break within 12 hours of the first dose," Ayana replied. "Full recovery usually takes 3 to 4 days." Dr. Webb carefully packed the bottles of medicine and prepared to return to town. Before leaving, he turned to Sam and Ayana with obvious gratitude. "I want you both to know that what you're doing today could save lives," he said. "Regardless of what some people in the community might think about your arrangement here, there are a lot of folks who will be grateful for your willingness to help." After Dr. Webb left, Sam and Ayana went about their regular ranch duties, but both found it difficult to concentrate on routine work while wondering about the effectiveness of the traditional medicine. The next 24 hours would determine whether Ayana's knowledge could help the sick people in the settlement. The answer came the following afternoon when Dr. Webb returned to the ranch, his face beaming with satisfaction and relief. "It worked," he announced as soon as he dismounted. "Every single patient is showing improvement. The fever broke in all the children by this morning, and the adults are responding just as well. I've never seen anything like it." The relief Sam felt was matched by the quiet satisfaction he saw in Ayana's expression. She had not only helped save lives, but she had done so using knowledge that connected her to her grandmother and the traditions of her people. "There's more," Dr. Webb continued. "Word has spread through the settlement about what happened. People are talking about how an Apache woman saved their children and grandparents. Tom Brennan and his friends are finding it harder to stir up trouble when folks are busy thanking you for what you've done." Over the following days, a steady stream of visitors came to the Double T Ranch. Parents brought children who had recovered from the fever to thank Ayanna personally. Older residents came to express their gratitude and to learn more about traditional healing methods. The woman who had been viewed with suspicion just a week earlier was now being celebrated as a hero who had saved the community. "Mrs. Patterson, the school teacher, asked me to extend an invitation," Dr. Webb told Sam and Ayanna during one of his visits. "She'd like Ayanna to speak to her students about Apache culture and traditional knowledge. She thinks it would be educational for the children to learn about the heritage of the territory they live in." Ayanna was initially hesitant about the invitation, but Sam encouraged her to accept. "You have knowledge that could benefit everyone in the territory," he pointed out. "Sharing it could help build understanding between our peoples." The presentation at the school was a remarkable success. Ayanna spoke to the children about Apache customs, explained how traditional knowledge was preserved and passed down through generations, and demonstrated some of the techniques used in traditional healing. The children were fascinated, and their enthusiasm helped spread positive feelings about Ayanna throughout the community. As autumn progressed toward winter, it became clear that Ayanna's temporary stay at the Double T had evolved into something more permanent. She had not only proven her value as a worker and healer, but she had also become an integral part of the ranch operation. Her skills with horses proved to be exceptional, and she helped Sam develop new training techniques that improved the quality of his saddle stock. "I've been thinking," Sam said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains with shades of purple and gold. "This ranch has always been too big for one person to manage properly. I could use a partner, someone who could handle the aspects of the operation that don't come naturally to me." Ayanna looked at him carefully, trying to read the meaning behind his words. "What kind of partnership are you thinking about?" "A full partnership," Sam replied. "You bring skills to this operation that I lack, and you've already proven that you can handle every aspect of ranch life. I'm thinking we could make this arrangement permanent, with shared ownership and shared profits." "That is a very generous offer," Ayanna said slowly. "But are you certain it is wise? There will always be people like Tom Brennan who disapprove of such arrangements. There will also always be people like Dr. Webb and Mrs. Patterson who judge others by their character and their actions rather than their ancestry," Sam replied. "I'd rather build my life around the opinions of people like them." Ayanna was quiet for several minutes, considering the offer and its implications. Finally, she turned to Sam with a smile that seemed to light up her entire face. "My grandmother always taught me to judge opportunities by their potential for good," she said. "I think this partnership has great potential for good, both for us and for this community." 6 months later, the legal papers were signed that made Ayanna a full partner in the Double T Ranch. The ceremony took place in Dr. Webb's office, with several respected members of the community serving as witnesses. Mrs. Patterson brought a cake she had baked for the occasion, and even the territorial marshal attended to show his support for the arrangement. Tom Brennan and his supporters had made one final attempt to cause trouble, but their efforts had fallen on deaf ears. The community had seen the value that Ayanna brought to the territory, and they were not willing to let prejudice override practical benefits. Her knowledge of traditional healing had saved lives, her skills with horses had improved the quality of livestock throughout the area, and her partnership with Sam had created one of the most successful ranches in the territory. The Double T Ranch prospered under the joint management of Sam and Ayanna. They expanded the horse breeding operation, developed new techniques for managing cattle on difficult terrain, and established the ranch as a center for sharing knowledge between white settlers and Apache traditions. Ayanna's sewing and craft work became highly sought after throughout the territory, and she began teaching traditional skills to other women who wanted to learn. 5 years after that cold October day, When Sam first encountered a lone Apache woman walking across his land, the Double T Ranch had become a symbol of what was possible when people looked past their differences to recognize their common humanity. Sam and Ayanna had built more than a successful business partnership. They had created a model for cooperation and understanding that influenced the entire territory. Dr. Webb often remarked that the outbreak of fever that had brought Ayanna's healing knowledge to light had been a blessing in disguise. It had forced the community to confront their prejudices and recognize the value of traditional knowledge that had been dismissed or ignored. The result was a stronger, more resilient community that benefited from the wisdom of all its members. Ayanna never forgot the desperate circumstances that had brought her to Sam's ranch, but she no longer thought of that time with sadness. Instead, she saw it as the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one that had allowed her to honor her grandmother's teachings while building something new and valuable for the future. Sam often reflected on the decision he had made that October afternoon when he first saw a solitary figure walking across his land. He had acted on instinct and principle, offering shelter to someone in need without considering the complications that might follow. That simple act of decency had transformed not only Ayanna's life, but his own, and the lives of everyone in their community. The story of Sam Thompson and Ayanna became part of the legend of the territory, passed down through generations as an example of how courage, compassion, and respect for human dignity could overcome prejudice and fear. Their partnership had proven that differences in culture and background could become sources of strength rather than division, and that the best communities were built on the foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. Years later, when visitors came to the Double T Ranch and asked about the successful partnership between a white rancher and an Apache woman, Sam would always give the same answer. Sometimes the most important decisions we make are the ones we don't really think about. We just do what we know is right and trust that good things will follow. Ayanna would add, "My grandmother taught me that helping others is never a mistake. The kindness you show to a stranger may come back to bless you in ways you never imagined." The Double T Ranch continued to thrive, serving as a bridge between two cultures and a testament to the power of human decency to overcome prejudice and fear. The decision Sam made on that windy October day had indeed changed everything forever, creating ripples of positive change that spread far beyond the boundaries of his ranch and influenced the character of the entire territory for generations to come.